Hi, everybody. I hope you enjoyed your snow day on Thursday. I am talking to you from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I am now visiting Carnegie Mellon University. For those of you who are particularly interested in science or engineering. Our topic today is building off of what we did on metaphysics last class. Okay, and we're going to be talking about philosophy of religion and in particular the existence of God. This is something I teach a whole course on. Actually, there's a few people who are in this course and my philosophy of religion course, in which case please just skip this video because we're doing all of this in class anyway. But for the rest of you, what we're going to be looking at today is proofs for the existence of God. Now, the first one of these is called the ontological argument. And the ontological argument was first suggested by Saint Anselm of Canterbury. He was a Benedictine monk and the Archbishop of Canterbury. And he suggested that you could prove the existence of God in what is actually an incredibly simplistic way. Philosophers disagree about whether or not this works, but it is a very interesting idea, if nothing else. Okay. Excuse me. So he says that the existence of God, okay, needs to start with how we define what God is. And he comes up with a definition that's basically this. God is that God is that thing greater than which nothing can be thought. Now, I'm going to simplify that slightly for our purposes and say that God is the greatest thing you can think of. And there's one way in which this might be different for everybody, but actually, if we start to really go in depth into the greatest thing you can think of, I think most of us would come up with something very similar. In order to be the greatest thing you can think of, you would have to be kind of without beginning or end, because you would have to be something that is infinite. Okay. And so, based on that, we could say that God is eternal. Okay. You would probably have to be all-powerful, because if you could think of something that wasn't all-powerful, then add power to that, that thing would be greater. And so, by saying that God is omnipotent, okay, all-powerful, we're gonna give God another quality that'd be the greatest thing you can think of. If you think of something that has some knowledge but not all knowledge, it wouldn't be the greatest thing you could think of. And so God needs to be omniscient, okay? God needs to be all-knowing. And so on and so forth. Now, you don't have to believe in God, okay, in order to come up with a definition of God. But what he says is that even people who don't believe in God have the idea, have this notion of what God is, and that notion is essentially God is the greatest thing you can think of. Now, we might not say this, okay, if you are of a particular religion, this might not be the way you talk about it, but it still kind of encapsulates what we mean when we say God. The second point that Anselm makes is that things that are true and real, okay, are greater than things that are imaginary. And I suppose that the question here would be, what would you rather have, an imaginary $1 million or a real $1 million? And your answer would probably be a real $1 million. But even there, okay, what would you rather have, an imaginary $1 million or a real $10? And there too, your answer is going to be the real $10. So um, like things that exist, okay, things that are actual, are what we would say is greater than things that are just imaginary. So you put these together, okay? God is the greatest thing you can think of, okay? Things that are real are greater than things that are imaginary. And if you put those two together, two things that pretty much any atheist or agnostic would be comfortable, agreeing to, we come up with the fact that God has to exist. Because if God is only an idea, then anything you think of would be greater than that. Okay? But we already agreed that God is the greatest thing you can think of. So if God is only imaginary, okay, then God is not as great as this actual cup of tea that I'm drinking. But because we said that God is the greatest thing you can think of, part of that definition means that he has to exist. Because a real God would be greater than a imaginary God. And so in order for God to be the greatest thing that you can think of, he has to be real. That is, in essence, the ontological argument as St. Anselm wrote it. Like I said, it is amazing in its simplicity, okay? It is almost unfulfilling to me because I'm okay, that can't be true. And there are people who have objected to the way Anselm said this. And one of their objections has been, well, but couldn't I say that about anything? Okay? If I think of an island greater than which no island can be thought, okay? The best island possible. And things that are greater are real, and things that are imaginary are less great. Then doesn't that perfect island have to exist? Now, I actually think Anselm has an argument against that, okay? If you're trying to think of the perfect island, okay, I imagine that a lot of you are thinking of, a Caribbean island, a beach somewhere, nice, blue water, white sand, okay? That is not, for me, the perfect island, okay? The perfect island, for me, is probably somewhere, dreary and, where it rains a lot and is, rocky beaches and not somewhere to go swimming, okay, somewhere like Ireland, okay, or maybe, and I was just down in Antarctica, as you know, and when I was down there, I stopped in the Falkland Islands, and the Falkland Islands are like that too, and I felt actually very happy and very comfortable in the Falklands. So people would maybe differ on how they would imagine a perfect island. And so right there we have a problem, because the idea of a perfect being, we don't really differ in that, okay? The qualities that we would give to God are pretty much the same across all religions, okay? And even really the same across, people who don't believe in God at all. We still have the concept of what would be a perfect being. So that would be one thing Anselm would say. But the other thing he would say is that if you're describing a perfect island, just as the example I'm going to use here, well, wouldn't an island that were really perfect, okay, be all powerful? Okay, if the island couldn't do something, then you could imagine a better island than that. It would be an island that can do anything. And wouldn't a smart island be better than a dumb island? And so in our view of what the island is, in order for it to actually be perfect, and the best island you could possibly think of, it would actually have to be omnipotent, okay, and omniscient, and If the island could like stop existing, okay, like if it could be destroyed, or if it could start existing and be created, that means it wouldn't always be there. So that wouldn't be perfect either. So we would need the island to be eternal. Do you see where I'm going with this? Okay. If we were describing the perfect island, what Anselm would say is that what we end up doing is actually describing God. And so, even though God may not be an island exactly, all the qualities that we would look for in a perfect island, in the island greater than which no other island could be thought, it would have to be an all-powerful island, right? Because then you could think of a better island if you had an island that couldn't do everything. It would have to be omniscient, because if you had an island that didn't know everything, so you see the problem here. Okay. And so I think part of Anselm's argument would be that the idea of the perfect island is something that would include be included in the idea of God. So there's that type of ontological argument. There is a second ontological argument. If you remember when we were talking about epistemology, I talked quite a bit about René Descartes, okay, the guy who said, "I think, therefore I am." One of the ways, and we talked about this briefly in that class, one of the ways that he tried to come back to reality was by proving that God exists. So he came up with also what we would call an ontological argument, but one different from Anselm's. What Descartes says is, and I think I actually went over this in class a little bit, but just to reiterate, all right? Everything that we can think of, okay, is based on something that actually exists. So even though a unicorn doesn't exist, okay, you think of a horse, you think of a horn, you stick them together, and poof, a unicorn. So even though a unicorn is imaginary, it's based on real things. But what God would say, Descartes is not God, just to put that out there. What Descartes would say is that how would you come up with the idea of God? What could you put together? Okay. God is like infinite. Okay. But can you put anything together that you've experienced that would create infinity? Okay. You don't actually have the experience of infinity through the things that we experience in the world, okay? Everything you've ever experienced is in fact finite. Similarly, perfection. Okay. What have you ever experienced that's perfect? Okay. Like in baseball, they talk about a perfect game, okay? But it's not actually a perfect game, is it? Okay? It can only be a perfect game for one side, all right? The other side has to mess up. And so it's only perfect from one perspective. And so what Descartes would say is that for something to actually be perfect, it would have to be perfect in all ways. And we have the idea of perfection, but there is no way from our experience of the world that you could add things up and create something perfect. So, what does that mean? Well, if all the things we can think of are made up of either things that we have experienced and are real, okay, like a mug, okay, or a combination of things that we've experienced, like a unicorn. How do we have the idea of God? God can't be made up of things that we've experienced because we haven't experienced perfection. We haven't experienced, infinity. And therefore, God must exist because the only things that we can think about are either things that actually exist or things that are combined of things that actually exist. And since God isn't combined of anything that actually exists, God must, in fact, exist. That's the ontological argument. Then there is something called the cosmological argument. Now, the most famous of these are from St. Thomas Aquinas. And he came up with 5 proofs. Well, I said 5, okay. Not 4. 5 proofs for the existence of God. Now, I actually don't think he ends up with 5. I think it's more like he has maybe 3.5 or so. But, I am not a Aquinas scholar exactly, so, he sometimes makes distinctions that I'm like, I'm not sure about that. But his first one is really interesting. Okay. His first proof for God's existence is to say that God is what we would maybe call the unmoved mover. Okay. Now, what he actually means is motion. And so, in order to do this, actually, let me move my camera down just for a second, okay? All right. So I have these straws that were used to mix my tea, okay? And they are going on the table. Then I have the saucer for my tea. Then I actually have my teacup, okay? Motion, okay? And this is how we understand motion, right? Okay. I push the teacup, and the cup pushes the saucer, and the saucer pushes the straws, okay? And eventually, if I, keep pushing, they will fall off the table, right? So, we know about motion, and we know this from, physics, okay? You learned about, Newton's laws of motion, okay? An object in motion tends to stay in motion, an object at rest tends to stay at rest, unless acted upon by an equal and opposite, force. So, what Aquinas says is, well, every motion that we see, okay, every motion that we experience on a daily basis comes from something else. So, I am, moving my hands around, and I just push my teacup, which pushed the saucer, which pushed the straws, okay? Where is my energy coming? And my energy is coming, and, think about this in terms, actually, of physics, okay? With potential energy and kinetic energy. So, my energy, my potential energy is coming from the fact that, let's say this morning, I ate breakfast, okay? So, I had a bagel for breakfast. And that is, powering my body and giving me energy, okay? So where did the bagel come from? Well, somebody made it, okay? It's made of flour, all right? Well, where did the flour come from? Well, somebody grew wheat. Okay, well, where did the wheat come from? Well, a plant grew. Well, where does that come from? Well, we have photosynthesis, okay? Well, where does that energy come from? It comes from the sun, okay? So the possibility of my having motion and my moving the cup or my doing anything is dependent on there being a chain of events, okay, where one force hits another force hits another force, okay? Or basically what we would say is a transfer of energy. Now, for those of you who are scientifically inclined, this is actually an incredibly scientific argument for the existence of God. And what actually Aquinas is saying is that all motion has to come from something, okay? All motion has to come from some other motion, from some other force, because that is our experience of the world. Now, this is before Newton, so he doesn't have Newton's laws, okay? But he's basically saying the same thing that Newton said. Now, if you know anything about physics, and how scientists would describe the creation of the universe, the prevailing agreement is what we call the Big Bang, okay? In other words, all matter, all energy, all everything was all together in one ball, okay? And then something went ping, and the universe started to expand, okay? The Big Bang. Now, for those of you, and part of the reason I put this in is because it really annoys me when people think that, like, science and religion don't work together, okay? I actually think they work together really well. Did you know that the person who came up with the Big Bang Theory, the first person to, like, come up with that theory about why the universe is expanding, was a Catholic priest? Okay. So even though I think our modern world says that science and religion are, like, knocking heads and that you can't be both, all right, I actually think that the fact that the Big Bang was, conceived by a priest, okay, or that, like, Sir Isaac Newton, who was incredibly religious, was trying to use physics to prove, like, the way God created the world. Or the fact that Thomas Aquinas, without a modern understanding of physics at all, still actually comes up with something like this. Suggests that maybe science and religion maybe could work together. But what Aquinas says is that there has to be something that starts off all motion. But his second point about that is that the mover, okay, and we're going to call God the unmoved mover, okay? Now, this does not give us a personal God, by the way. This doesn't give us, like, a guide of the Bible or the Torah or the Quran or anything else. It just gives us this force that starts everything off, okay? So what Aquinas is basically arguing for here is whatever did that ping in the Big Bang and, like, made the universe expand. Which he didn't know was happening. Like, he didn't know that the universe was expanding when he said this, which makes it even cooler, I think. Right. But what Aquinas says is, whatever it is that starts off all this motion has to have within it all potential motion. Because there can't be, like, a force that's, like, there can't be a motion that, like, whatever pushed it doesn't have the power to make, okay? You think about this in terms of, like, when we talk about potential energy, okay? Or when we talk about, like, friction. Okay. If I push on the wall, what does the wall do? It pushes back on me. Now, if I push with all my force, okay, I am not going to knock over the wall. But if we bring out, like, the Ohio State football team, okay, and I'm using them because I'm going to be there actually tomorrow. I'm going to be at Ohio State. But if I, bring out the entire Ohio State football team and have them push the wall, maybe they could knock it over, okay? Maybe not. But whatever they could do, all right, like, their force would have to be greater than the force of the wall if they were going to knock it over. So whatever started the Big Bang, and Aquinas doesn't say this because, of course, he doesn't know about the Big Bang, but whatever started the Big Bang has to have greater force than all the motion that came out of that. But the other thing, he says, that has to happen is that it has to be unmoved in return, okay? So, how, like, it's an opposite and equal force, okay? God has to be all potential energy, but not kinetic energy. So that unmoved mover has to be able to, like, push, but not have the wall push back. And if we think about that, when we think about the Big Bang, okay, ping, everything starts expanding. Okay. But there's not something else that is being, like, pushed in the opposite direction. So I would argue that actually the Big Bang proves Aquinas' first proof for the existence of God. that there is like an unmoved mover, something that causes all motion. Okay. Like I said, that doesn't give you a personal God. It doesn't give you a scriptural God. It doesn't give you any religion. It just gives you this idea of God as like force, God as energy. But there's a second proof that Aquinas gives, and it's similar to the first, but it's also different, okay? This is, the second one is an uncaused cause, okay? So the unmoved mover is talking about, like, actual motion, okay? The uncaused cause is the idea that everything has a cause. Why am I in Pittsburgh? Well, because somebody paid me to go to Pittsburgh. Why did somebody do that? Because they're trying to help their, kid get into college. Why, and we can keep going back, all right? We can also go back, with physical causes. So, how did I get into this room? Well, I checked into the hotel, and I walked up the stairs, and I walked through the door, and one thing followed another. Okay. We live in a world where we accept cause and effect. Okay. If you were to turn on your sink in the morning, okay, and you're turning on your sink to brush your teeth, and instead of water coming out of the tap, okay, it was single malt scotch, I would hope that you would do one thing first, okay, which is call me and tell me to bring buckets, all right, and I will, okay, if you turn on your faucet and single malt scotch comes out, I'll show up, okay, just let me know. But I actually think that the first thing you would probably do is look under the sink. We don't accept things happening for no reason. Okay? We always look for a cause. Always. And we expect there to be a cause, because if we didn't experience causality every day of our life, we would never know what was going to happen, okay? You would, open your dorm room door and step outside and, be in the Sahara Desert. Because things would just happen randomly, okay? You would, drop something, and instead of it falling, it would, rise across the room and, fly into somebody else's face. Our experience of the world is that, there is causality. So, everything we see, we know it has a cause from something else. Okay. But there's this problem. Okay. The problem is that there is, a cause and effect, a cause and effect, a cause and effect, a cause and effect, okay? And it, keeps going back. Okay. But we're not okay with what's called infinite regress. Things they're our experience of the world is that things start, okay, things begin, and so a series of events would have to begin, and so what Aquinas says is God is the uncaused cause. All right, he is that thing which starts all the effects without himself, okay, being an effect, okay? So nothing causes God, God just causes everything else. Now, what this gets us to is a question about time, and this is a class that I wish I was doing in person, but one of the benefits to this is that I might actually go over time, and it doesn't matter because it's a video. So if I do go over the length of a class that we would normally have, in this particular case, I'm just assigning the rest of that as homework. So just keep watching, all right? But time. Our conception of time, and I should have known, by the way, that I was going to be a philosophy professor, because when I was a child, I used to stay up at night and worry about this. And I actually, I remember not being able to sleep at night because I started thinking about, but how could God exist forever? Doesn't God have to have a beginning? Because everything else has a beginning, so why wouldn't God have a beginning? And, then what caused God? And I was, 8, and, not things I should have been thinking about, but that's what kept me up at night. And, I actually figured this out on, when I was in high school. I got to study abroad in England. And the school I was studying at, the drinking age in England at the time was 16, or probably more accurately, whenever you could be tall enough to see over the bar. But officially it was 16. And so the high school I went to had a bar on campus. We could drink with faculty and stuff like that. It was just that was the way it was over there. And I remember being at this bar with my English teacher. And I don't know how it came up, but I told him that I had this problem about God and causality. And that I didn't understand how God could just have a cause, could not have a cause, could just exist. And he explained it to me in a way that has stuck with me ever since, and I find it really useful. Okay. So, if I were in class, this is one of the few times that I would draw on the board. But what I would draw is a hot air balloon. And if you think about a hot air balloon, okay, when it is tethered to the ground, okay, imagine yourself standing in that hot air balloon. Okay. As you look straight down from your basket, okay, all you can see is a very narrow slice of things. Okay, you can see a few feet on either side, but you're tethered to the ground, so you can just see the ground. Okay, and you are stuck in that position, looking down. But once they untether the balloon and it starts to rise, okay, gradually you can see more and more and more and more. And if you can imagine that balloon rising infinitely, okay, you could see everything. Now, our experience of time is that time has a beginning and an end, okay? You're born and then you die, and it keeps going in one direction. Okay. But imagine that you are God in a hot air balloon over the timeline. For God, looking down from that hot air balloon, the moment that you're born, and the moment that I'm creating this video, and the moment that you're watching this video, and the moment I die, and the moment you die, and all of those moments, okay, if you're rising above the timeline, you can see it all. Okay. So the moment you are born and the moment you die are happening for God at exactly the same time. In other words, God is outside the system, okay? God sees the system, okay? But God is not in time, God is outside of time. And so for us, things happen in a row, okay? For God, everything would happen in time all at once, because he's outside the system looking down on the system. So he can see the beginning of time, the end of time, and for him, they are the same moment. Do you get this? Stupid question, I know, because you can't answer me. But if you don't get this, I want you to email me about it. All right. So the idea of God needing a cause, okay, everything in the timeline has a cause, okay, because it has a beginning and a middle and an end, okay? But everything outside the timeline, i.e., God, doesn't need to have that same structure. And so this is why we do metaphysics first. Because remember we talked about essence and existence? Okay. What Aristotle would say about God is that for God, his essence is existence itself. He is not being as like something, okay? He is being itself. And so, in his way, God is above the system. God is beyond the system that we experience. And so, even though for us, the timeline is going in one direction, for God, because his essence is existence, he's outside of that. And so when Aquinas says the uncaused cause, what he's really getting at is this idea that God would have to be somehow outside of time. All right. We're going to take a break from Aquinas just for a second, because I'm going to give you a different but similar proof, which is called the Kalam cosmological argument. Now, this is something that requires actually a modern understanding of physics. So Aquinas could not have come up with this. Okay. But it actually proves exactly the same thing Aquinas did, except it uses physics. So, if you have studied chemistry, okay, you know that in every, in every chemical reaction, okay, there is some energy released. And some of that energy is released in the form of heat. And we cannot recapture all the heat. And so eventually, all energy in the universe will be the form of heat. And as you know, and we experience this, right? So when you go outside right now, it's colder, okay? And you experience the cold because you are warmer inside because the inside is heated. You go outside, the outside is not heated, and your body and the outside are trying to go for equilibrium. Okay. If you have an open window, okay, you know that it's going to get colder because the hot air inside is going to go outside. And so in our understanding of heat, okay, we know that we're looking for everything to be at an equilibrium. What physics says is that eventually in the universe, all energy will be heat, and it will all be distributed equally throughout the universe. And this is called the heat death of the universe, okay? When nothing else is possible, when there can be no more changes, because all energy is heat, and all heat is distributed equally. So, what does this have to do with proving that God exists? Well, we know this from physics and chemistry, okay? We know about the heat death of the universe. This is also something that could keep you up at night, except this is not going to happen anytime within our lifetime or probably in the history of humanity. All right. This will happen far, far in the future, so let's not stress out about it. It's also inevitable, so let's not stress out about it because we can't do anything. But okay, the Kalam cosmological argument says this. Okay. There are two possibilities. One is that the universe is infinite. Okay, that time is infinite. The other is that there is a beginning. Okay. If the universe is infinite, then an infinite amount of time should have happened. And if an infinite amount of time has already happened, there should already have been the heat death of the universe. The fact that the heat death of the universe has not occurred means that the universe is not infinite. That it had to start. That there had to be a beginning. Because if there wasn't a beginning, we would already be at the heat death of the universe. So, if there has to be a beginning, then there has to be something that would start it. And that gives us causality. Because our experience of the world and everything we know in science says that everything is either like a continuation of something from before, or it has a cause. The universe has to have had a cause because it started. There was a time it didn't exist, and it came into existence. And we call that cause God. So Aquinas and the Kalam cosmological argument basically say the same thing here, but they say it in two very different ways. Right? Do you get that? I hope so, because if you didn't, you just have to email me because I can't answer your questions. So, there is a third proof that Aquinas gives that I don't really want to take the time to go into because I don't think it's as good. But it is, you can look up, if you want to look up Aquinas' 5 proofs, you can do that. And then there is his last proof. And his last proof, he means in a different way than sort of like more modern people talk about this. But he listed his proofs for himself in the order in which he thought they were like reasonable. And so of the 5 proofs, this is the one he thinks is the least reasonable. And it is also, I would say, today, probably the most popular, even though I think it sucks. Because it doesn't actually prove that God exists. It just proves that God probably exists. So, rather than give you Aquinas' version of this, I am going to give you kind of the modern version of this. And this is what we would maybe call the design argument. Okay. And like I said, it is very popular. Okay. And the design argument goes something like this. Okay. The possibility of us existing just totally randomly is infinitesimal. We know from physics, we know from, our understanding of the universe, that there is like a sweet spot that we are not too close to the sun or too far away from the sun. Because if we are too close to the sun, we couldn't exist because it would be too hot. If we were too far away from the sun, we couldn't exist because it would be way too cold. So the Earth is in like the perfect place for life to exist. Secondly, even if we ignore that part of it, all right, there is something, and this is something that I have heard from pretty much everyone in the medical profession. Almost all my friends are doctors. I'm the idiot who didn't go to medical school and instead studied philosophy. Go figure there. But almost all my friends are doctors. And one of the things they have all said, and some of them are religious and some of them are not religious and some of them are atheists, but they all wonder in amazement at the human body and what the human body can do. Okay. And actually, if you look at the human body, it's sort of an amazing thing. Okay, life itself is sort of an amazing thing. The fact that our brains can send signals to our body and we can move in these fantastic ways, and are, we have, like, we breathe in oxygen and we breathe out carbon dioxide. And isn't it really useful that, like, plants breathe in carbon dioxide and breathe out oxygen? Like, that's great. Or else we couldn't exist, okay? So, like, even the greater system shows this, but, like, just our bodies, like, the way, like, our cells grow and the way, like, our blood and circular system works. And, like, there's something amazing about the human body. And so, that amazement, okay, that, like, all the things that could be slightly different in the human body that would make us not work, that would make it impossible for us to live, and yet we do. And so the odds against us existing are huge, and yet here we are. And what people who like the design art argument, okay, would say is that it's just about impossible that this could have happened randomly. Now, I'm going to say that I agree with that, okay? It is just about impossible. But it is not totally impossible. Okay? It is incredibly improbable, but improbable things do sometimes happen. So I don't think that the design argument is a particularly effective argument to prove that God exists. I just think it's an effective argument to say that, like, there must be some design behind this, seems a lot more likely than this just happened randomly. Okay. And so, like, the design of the universe, I will actually say, like, could it have happened randomly? Yes. Does it seem likely? Not so much. Okay. It's much more likely that nothing exists than that we exist. And so the fact that we exist in a universe that, works, and that, we have all the forces of the universe that work together, and we have all the parts of our body that work together, and, like, there's so many things that could have been against us, and yet we exist, suggests that there's some design involved. But it doesn't prove it. And so, would I bet on there being a design involved? Well, I actually think it would be a good bet to make, okay? Like, I'd give it, like, really good odds. Okay. Infinitely good odds, almost. But is there that 0.0000001% chance that it all happened randomly? Well, the way the design argument talks about it, yes. Okay. So, is it likely that we were designed? Maybe. Is it possible that we weren't designed? Yes. So I don't buy that one. But a lot of people like it because, and this is one of the things that, like, people dislike about the other proofs that we've talked about. A design argument suggests, like, a personal God. Okay. A God who is interested in us. Because he would have to at least have been interested enough in us to create us, to, like, bring the universe into existence. And so all the other proofs for God's existence that we have talked about could potentially be this, like, outside force, but not, like, the way we think about God, like the way, like, like Christians or Muslims would talk about, like, God caring about us. That would be, like, is that possible with the other proofs for God's existence? Yes. But it's not definite. But in the design argument, there's some way in which it is definite because, like, a designer has to have some level of intelligence. Okay. And so that's why they call this, like, intelligent design. All right. those are some of the most popular proofs for the existence of God. There are others out there. We don't have the time in this class to go through with them, and actually, I would say that most of them either fall under the ontological argument, the cosmological argument, or the intelligent design argument. All right. But, and we are now at 50 minutes, so this is going to go over time, but like listen to it anyway because I'm going to give you 5 more minutes. So there is one other kind of useful thing to bring up when we are talking about the existence of God. And it involves a French mathematician that you have probably heard of, actually. You, in geometry, would have studied, or at least heard the name of Pascal, Blaise Pascal, because you know Pascal's triangle. Okay, Pascal was a mathematician. He was a French mathematician during the period that we call the Enlightenment. And all his friends were scientists and mathematicians, and all of them were atheists. And Blaise Pascal went to church every single day. And his friends mocked him. They're like, how are you, this brilliant mathematician, probably one of the smartest ones among us, you're certainly the best mathematician among us, and here you are going and doing superstitious things like going to church. And so they said, like, this is, you're an idiot. Like, give it up, dude. And he said, Now, if you ever study economics, okay, you're going to study something called game theory, or the prisoner's dilemma, it's sometimes called. And what Pascal did was come up with what is now known as Pascal's wager. And Pascal's wager doesn't prove that God exists at all. Okay. What it does prove is why you should believe in God. And there are 4 possibilities, he says. Possibility 1, you believe in God and God exists. Possibility 2, you believe in God and God doesn't exist. Possibility 3, you don't believe in God and God exists. Possibility 4, you don't believe in God and God doesn't exist. So what Pascal says is, if you believe in God and God doesn't exist, or you don't believe in God and God doesn't exist, it doesn't matter. Because at the end of your life, you're dead and you don't even know. Because that's the end of it. So if God doesn't exist, it doesn't matter whether or not you believed in God or not. Your outcome is the same. However, if you believe in God and God exists, you go to heaven. If you don't believe in God and God exists, you go to hell. And so what Pascal says is, there is one positive outcome, one negative outcome, and 2 neutral outcomes. So if I have to make a choice, he says, I am going to choose to say that God exists, because that is the only way that I have a possibility of a good outcome. If I make the other choice, I either have a neutral outcome or a really bad outcome. So it makes sense to believe in God, because if you don't believe in God, the best thing that happens is that your life ends and that's it. Okay. But the worst thing that happens is that you were wrong and you go to hell. Now, this does not prove that God exists. It just proves why maybe you should believe in God. What I want to say about it is that Pascal gave this specifically to his friends who were mocking him because he wanted to show that what he was doing wasn't foolish, it was smart. I don't think that Pascal was going to church every day because he was trying to like beat the system. Okay. Pascal, from his writings, it's very clear that he had actual faith. Okay, that this wasn't just a bet. But for all his atheist scientist friends, okay, they had nothing to say to it because what could they say? He was right. The only thing that got a positive outcome in those four scenarios was believing in God. And so they had to stop mocking him. And so I don't know what you think about God, okay? This is not going to answer questions about like what religion you should believe in. Okay, that's theology, not philosophy. Okay. But if you're somebody who doesn't believe in God, okay, I highly doubt anything I said in this class would convince you that God exists. Okay. But I think it's important for all of us to not be under the like misconception that like believing in God is stupid. Because I think it's really easy for us to say that, but in actuality, as Pascal showed, it's maybe more stupid to not believe in God. Okay. All right. I hope you guys have a great weekend. I will, be doing another video for you on Monday. But, until then, I will, be wandering around Ohio and other places. So our next video, I think I'm going to be filming. I think it's from the University of Michigan. So I will talk to you from there. Thanks very much. Bye.